Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Collaborative Science for Estuaries webinar series. This is Nick Sobral with the Science Collaborative, and we're glad you can join us for this webinar that we're very pleased to be co-hosting alongside NOAA's Restore Science program, and that webinar is titled Collaborative Science Conversations, Designing Science for Coastal and Ocean Decision Making. Today's webinar will be broken into a few main sections, so I think there's three main sections. So first, our moderators will provide some background information on the Science Collaborative and Restore Science programs. And then each panelist will have a minute or so to provide some opening remarks about their expertise with collaborative science. And the second section will consist of a moderator discussion, and finally we'll end with some Q&A time at the end. As usual, all attendees are muted upon entry, and we'll be handling questions via the question feature on the GoToWebinar console. And we, as always, encourage you to submit questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar by entering them into the questions field, just so we don't lose them. And those questions are only visible to organizers, so they'll come directly to me and Megan, who is working in the background as well. Before we get started with the webinar, just a quick look at the registration today. We're just always so impressed by the range of people that sign up for these webinars and who take an interest in the topic. And it's really exciting to see that collaborative science is clearly something that's of so much interest and importance, both across the US and beyond. So welcome to all of you. We hope you continue to engage with us. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome back Doug George as one of our co-moderators for today's webinar session. Doug is a trained geological oceanographer and the NERRS Science Collaborative Program Manager at NOAA's Office for Coastal Management. He has worked throughout the West Coast as a federal scientist, state resource manager, and environmental consultant with projects ranging from estuary restoration and living shorelines to regional sediment management and climate change adaptation. And we've been lucky to have Doug moderate a few webinar sessions for us, and that one's on him because we keep asking, he just keeps saying yes. So we're pleased to welcome Doug back, and Doug, the floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Nick, and for the introduction. And I'm going to return a favor back and say thank you for all the background work you do on these to make them seem so seamless, and you keep inviting me back because of that. So thank you, Nick. As Nick said, I'm the program manager at the NERRS Science Collaborative, and within the Office for Coastal Management at NOAA. And we're really excited to bring this first of its kind event of a joint webinar with our with the NOAA Restore Science program. And you'll hear a little bit more about that in a moment, but we're hoping this will be an annual event in the future, so keep it on your calendars. I'd like to share a few thoughts about this special event before we get started. Within the NOAA family of line offices, there are several programs that emphasize bringing science to management. And Sea Grant is one example that many of you might be familiar with. Others are housed within protected spaces, and others span specific geographic regions. So what they all have in common is an emphasis on generating science with decision-making in mind. And there are a few different expressions of this that many of us have heard throughout our work: collaborative research, co-production of science, management-driven science, and co-generation of science are just a few. But there are a few different ways to express the same concept. So many months ago, a few of us within the NOAA from the Science Collaborative and from the Restore programs came together to look at our similarities and the issues around collaborative science within other communities that we serve. So we came to the idea of having what we're calling collaborative science conversations. And we're going to explore how co-production of science blossoms, as well as what can hold it back. So our first topic emerged quickly when we were in our discussions, which is how can you build relationships and engender trust amongst partners? And even more challenging in a virtual world, how do you maintain that trust? So today we're going to dig into that researcher-manager relationship with help of three very experienced practitioners that have been doing collaborative science for some time in three different areas. They geographically span the Gulf of Mexico, but what they're going to talk about can be applied really anywhere, and we really hope that you'll hear your experiences in their stories that they're going to share with us as we go through today. And we really would like, as Nick said, to hear from you as well in joining the discussion and in putting your questions into the Q&A box. And then also, if there's topics as we go forward with our annual event that you'd like to hear about, please share those as well, and we'll collect those. And we really want to hear from our communities. So with that in mind, I'll say a few words about the NERRS to welcome those of you who are coming more from the Restore program, who may not be familiar with the NERRS program yet. So the NERRS is a network of 29 reserves across the nation into the Caribbean and the Pacific Ocean. We protect 1.3 million acres of coasts and estuary spaces, and we use these spaces as incubators for doing research, education, and training in those locations. We have a 30th that's coming online, and then in Louisiana, there's another one coming soon, so we're growing as well. So that 1.3 million is going to grow. I'd like to give a nod to, the 4 program. The way we do this is we have 4 programs within the NERRS: land stewardship, the research and scientific monitoring, training programs around coastal issues, and then education. And with a nod to my predecessor, Dwight Troubled, the NERRS Science Collaborative has been in existence for 13 years, and we are moving into some new areas. So next slide, please, Nick. So we have 5 coastal areas that we are focused on: climate change, ecosystem services, using long-term monitoring data and applying it to understand status, trends, and conditions, habitat resilience, and water quality. And we use those focus areas to drive co-produced research and science transfer within the NERRS system. And the reserves can play any number or all of these roles that you see on the bottom of the slide as users, as project leads, or any of the other ones, including stakeholder. So with that introduction for the Science Collaborative and to the NERRS system, I'm going to happily turn the mic over to my co-moderator, Jeanne Bloomberg from the Restore program, and she'll introduce us to that.
Thanks, Doug. So yeah, I'm Jeanne Bloomberg. I am a National Academy of Sciences Gulf Research Program Science Policy Fellow, and I'm working with the NOAA Restore Science Program for my fellowship. And a little bit of background on what the science program is. The NOAA Restore Science Program was authorized by Congress in the wake of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill to carry out research and observation and monitoring to support long-term sustainability of Gulf of Mexico ecosystems with special emphasis on its fisheries. So the program offers an opportunity to improve the understanding of the Gulf of Mexico, and at the same time, we use that knowledge to sustainably management. And then in practice, what this ends up looking like is we support teams of research managers and researchers to work together to produce science that helps answer the questions resource managers are asking. And so by investing in these relationships and supporting actionable science and promoting the practice of co-production over the next couple decades, we aim to transform roughly $133 million of the penalties from the oil spill into applied ecosystem science in the Gulf of Mexico. And in hopes of building a community of research managers and researchers, committed to this type of work in the region. And with that, I will now introduce some of the panelists we have, and starting with Christine Angelini in the next slide, please. And I'll let Christine introduce herself with her name, role of affiliation, and then a brief overview of your experience with collaborative science.
Hey, hi everyone, and thank you for attending. So I'm Christine Angelini. I'm the director for the Center for Coastal Solutions and an associate professor in environmental engineering sciences at the University of Florida. And my experience working with collaborative science really started day one of my academic and research faculty career here at the University of Florida when I pursued a science collaborative grant in the first few months of my tenure. And over the last few years, I'll briefly say that I worked on a variety of transferring science to management topics, and that continues today and is really kind of expanding, working on things ranging from how do we build living shorelines able to withstand vessel traffic and mitigate the effects of boat traffic on oyster reefs and salt marshes, how do we enhance the functionality of different types of shellfish for improving water quality in impaired waterways in Florida, and finally, what are strategies we should take to apply dredged sediments to the surface of marshes to improve marsh resilience to sea level rise and support channel navigation in our region. So that's just a flavor of the different types of research that I've done, and with a very much a lens towards translating to policy and management. So thanks.
Thanks. And next, I'll hand it over to Mike Langston to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Mike Langston. I am the Deputy Director at the South Central Climate Adaptation Science Center. I'm a USGS employee. So my experience with co-production started with my dissertation way back when. It was to look at different techniques. My dissertation topic was looking at different techniques to involve stakeholders in environmental decision making, and I participated in about 5 different projects where that was the goal of the project, including the Oklahoma Comprehensive Water Plan. I got my PhD at Oklahoma State University. I spent about 10 years working with the Oklahoma Water Resources Research Institute, where I was in charge of facilitating a stakeholder advisory committee for that institute. They helped us make decisions on which projects to fund. And for the past 7 years, I've been here at the South Central CASC, and we also have a stakeholder advisory committee, which I am responsible for. They help us in making decisions about what projects to fund and what areas the center needs to move into. For example, some other examples of what the committee does and other things that we do to engage stakeholders are we try to fund projects that are focused on co-production. It has been a challenge because, frankly, most institutions, most universities aren't set up to reward researchers for that kind of participation. And we'll talk a lot more about that today, I think. One of the things that we do is when we evaluate our projects, we make coordination with partners and engagement with stakeholders the most heavily weighted criteria that we use when we are evaluating those proposals. We also, at the South Central CASC, have a group of universities and tribal nations that work with us in promoting and mentoring and training people in co-production. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And finally, our third panelist today is Eric Sparks, and I will let him tell you an overview of his experience with collaborative science.
Hey, I'm Eric Sparks. I'm the Director of Coastal and Marine Extension at Mississippi State University and an Associate Extension Professor, and also affiliated with Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant Consortium. And there I work as the Assistant Director for Outreach and also a Coastal Ecology Specialist. And I was very fortunate to come in on like a very applied research project for my graduate school. And it was focused on marsh restoration techniques. And since then, been able to like keep going down that flow of applied research and incorporate in a lot of co-production through a lot of help from the Weeks Bay and Grand Bay National Estuary Research Reserves, as well as some other reserves too. But our primary focus areas are, like I said, applied research, but focused on coastal conservation and restoration, primarily fringing marshes, as well as we're doing a lot of litter and marine debris work now too. So that's it in a nutshell.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeannie, for bringing our panelists in. Jeannie and I are going to be co-moderating, as you can see now. So we'll be tag teaming back and forth with the questions. So the first question that we have that we wanted to pose to our panelists is in this space: is what approaches have you used to begin forming collaborative relationships with stakeholders and communities? And we'll take a few minutes to sort of organize around this topic as we move into the subsequent questions. But I'm gonna ask a few probing questions from each one of you. Mike, I want to start with you, and could you talk a little bit about what you call old school, and your approach from that perspective?
Sure. So to me, there is no substitute for standing in someone's office, shaking their hand, and introducing yourself to them. I think that that is a important way to communicate that their activities, their whatever they're involved in, is of value to you. In today's virtual world, that's much more of a challenge, especially right now, but I still do it. I am fortunate. I do not have young children at home. So it's a lot easier for me than for many of you to travel. But I spend about 3 to 5 days, 1 week usually, traveling every month. And I think that, now I have to travel around a 4-state region. Most of you who might be at a university, you probably just travel around your university to build those relationships with the agency personnel near, or travel around your state to build those relationships with folks who are in the agencies. So that's what I mean by being an old school, shake your hand, look you in the eye, introduce myself person.
That's great, because the looking in your eye and sort of, my next question was going to be to Christine, like, you put yourself in that place, what do you do when you're in that office? How are you engaging with the people that you're meeting?
Sure. So I think it's really important to understand the roles and responsibilities of the people that you're talking to and really show buy-in that you care about what is their job, what does success mean for them, what are they passionate and what do they care about, and even in the personal relationship skills, what's something personal about them that you can start to build some type of relationship and rapport. And I think then you know what types of questions to ask them in the future, what type of expertise you can rely on them for, and just, some of that kind of casual back and forth that's really important for making the relationship enjoyable. So I think that's really kind of important to get your foot in the door and reciprocally then offer up that type of information about yourself. What is it that you're passionate about? What are you really excelling at? What's your skill set? But you have to ask first the other person to make sure, I think, to really build that, investment that you care about them and you care about the relationship.
I like where you're headed with that, because what both of you have already sort of intimated in that is listening, is the engaging and listening. So I'm wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit more about the learning aspect from stakeholders that you've experienced with respect to building those first initial relationship blocks.
Yeah, sorry, it broke up there a little bit. Was that one directed at me?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that was to you.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't know. Like the most important thing to me, both professionally and personally, is to build that trust from the beginning. And so going in with a very, very clear mindset that you're eager to learn and you want to learn as much as you can about all the processes and procedures and everything that the people that you're working with have to go through to do projects, because every organization is different. It's really important from my perspective, because it really helps understand kind of maybe some red tape that's associated with getting a project done in one area versus another, and factor that into kind of the conversation going forward. And but yeah, just building those personal relationships to most of the end users that I interact with in a professional and personal sense now. We just kind of become friends over time, and I really enjoy that. Not really great for a work-life balance, but I really enjoy that aspect of it. But I mean, we kind of have shared interests anyway. But yeah, I think building that foundation of trust is the most important thing, and a lot of times that turns into friendship too, from my experience so far.
I see Mike and Christine nodding their heads a lot. Either one of you want to add anything to enhance that what Eric said?
Yeah, I'll quickly say something, which is that I learned very quickly that the organization and the structures that exist in where our stakeholders or our end users or managers work looks very different from what I'm familiar with in academics. That, you know, who reports to who, what their success metrics are, what their day-to-day responsibilities are, what their constraints are in their job, what they can and can't do based on their job description. Is really important to understand how to effectively work with them and make sure you can co-produce a project where their roles and responsibilities match what they can do and aligns with their interests. And so I think that investment, not just in the person, but in understanding the organization, as maybe boring as that seems like it could be initially, I think is really important to be successful in building these relationships strategically. And yes, so I'll just leave it with that.
Yeah, Mike, go ahead. Thank you, Christine.
I'd like to add that for a lot of us in the science field, and me personally, I did not go into this field because I wanted to work with people. I went into this field because I wanted to count bugs and bunnies, right? This is not what I signed up for. But I very quickly learned in my first job that all you deal with every day is people, just about, you know? I mean, yes, there's plants and animals involved and there's science involved, but working with people was not my strength. And so I had to develop these skills. I had to grow in my confidence and my interpersonal skills. So it is something you can learn, but it wasn't what I started out to do.
Well, I think you've grown well, Mike. I mean, I've only known you for a short time, but you know, it shows. So I think we'll leave this question. And Jeanne, why don't you go into the next one?
All right. Awesome. Well, I think that really kind of opens the door into, you know, thinking about our approaches. And I think we're going to shift gears a little bit about, you know, once we have a bit of a foundation laid, about how we manage expectations. And so I guess I'll start off with Eric, talking about how a two-way dialogue really facilitates managing expectations.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the whole trust thing from the beginning. But whenever our group and a bunch of groups that we work with go in to scope out a project, I mean, we're very, very eager to learn all the processes and needs from those end user groups. And so I feel like there's a whole lot more information coming in from us than we're spitting out, which is a great thing from my perspective. And it helps to have that documented need to get proposals funded and get work done and have a true impact. So yeah, I mean, two-way dialogue and going in wanting to learn more as opposed to wanting to tell people more seems to be a good approach so far. That, you know, it's worked for us. And as far as expectations go, like I guess I'm a little biased because that's almost all we do is co-produced science. I wouldn't even know what the expectation would be for it not to be co-produced science at this point. So yeah, that's what we tell the folks in our group is, if we don't know what we're going to do with the information, we more than likely are not going to write a proposal to even do that work. Like we already know like who's going to get it, how they're going to get it, and to inform the decisions that they need to make. But yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, fair enough. No, I think it's a kind of a unique outlook that I've found as you know, researchers. You know, I think your outlook of what would you do if you weren't co-producing is unique, and it's really interesting to hear what you have to share about that. So I guess I'll hand it to Christine, and talking about, you know, how we use this engagement and dialogue that Eric mentions, and how you have built that into your work.
Sure. So I think that you know, I think the co-production of science it needs to start with that there's a need in which there's a research component that's needed to solve, like fulfill that need. That's where the sort of the academic and the research side comes in, and that the management side, that they have an outcome or response that they can achieve should they get that information. And so I think that there has to be a shared vision initially about what the value of the work is. And I think this is some of what Eric was getting to, and then how that information is going to get used. And I think that's the foundational nugget. But then I think it's really important to identify what are the products that we need to achieve, and what would be an important product for an academic could be very different from your resource manager that's on your team. And so I think building in the expectation that this project will produce both the products that are important for me for tenure and promotion and my sort of career success, and the outputs that are important for those you're co-producing science with, and that there's then you build out the process for achieving those outcomes, and that, you know, ideally you're iterating and supporting each other along the way to produce those outcomes. So I think that there has to be a shared vision about the purpose and the process and the products that come through, and I think a buy-in and commitment from each other to do that. But I also want to say one thing, which is I think there's every team, there's a lot of diversity. And one of the things I've really struggled with as an academic, I have been really willing to go spend the time in to build these relationships and be this people person. And there's many other research academics that don't want to do that. That is not a priority for them. And I think this is one of the barriers that maybe we want to talk about in this session. And I think that you can manage expectations on your team on both sides, the science and the translation and the management side, about who's really going to be the key linkages and what does that process look like. And maybe it's not everybody on your team that has to do that exceptionally well. And I've had to kind of give in and cave in some cases, that there's a couple of us that really build the fundamental fabric of that relationship. So I think that's another element of expectations that you've got to be really honest with yourself and your team members about. So thanks.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think, you know, I think we've been talking a lot about expectations on the researcher side, which is really clear. But you know, I was wondering, Mike, do you have anything about managing expectations on the other side, on the management side? Is there something that there are other challenges that you meet there as well?
I think that both Eric and Christine did an excellent job of kind of outlining the process. If I could draw a thread between the two answers, I would say that it's about trust and communication from the beginning. So what we do in our grants program is we try to encourage and fund projects that start with consultations with the stakeholders, the end users, from the very beginning. So projects that say, you know, well, we're going to do this work and then we're going to give it to these stakeholders at the end, that's not really co-production. It could be actionable science, but I think that trust is just so incredibly important. We work a lot with tribes in our region. Imagine having to walk into a tribal manager's office and shake his hand and say, "Hi, I'm from the federal government and I'm here to help you." It doesn't go very well. They've been burned way too many times. So we work long and hard to build that trust that Eric was talking about. It is just so important. And my advisor used to tell me, and it is so true, trust is asymmetrical, meaning it takes a long time to build trust, and you could lose it in an instant by doing the wrong thing. That's why managing expectations with good communication is so important over the life of your project and even beyond. You know, and that's why what Eric said about building those personal relationships, even friendships with the people, that builds trust, you know. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, and in previous discussions, you know, I think each of you have mentioned that, like, there's also a monetary amount of trust that goes into this, you know, putting aside, you know, budgets and money for these trust building exercises. Do any of you have anything to add on to that?
I think, yeah, just to say that I think it's really important to talk about the financial part of these, you know, when you're proposal writing, to make sure it's very easy for the scientists to say we need most of the budget because we have to do all this kind of important science. But then you need to make sure that the partners on your team have the resources and the time and the manpower and that they need to fulfill their responsibilities and are set up to succeed. And so I think that's a really good opportunity for defining expectations and talking that through, and then putting numbers behind that reflect the way that you value their engagement and their time, and that they are really adequately resourced to participate in the way that you need to. And the same thing on the academic side, that you have the workshop time, that you have the consulting time, that you have the travel to go and spend face-to-face time to fulfill that co-production process. So I think it's really important to think about in the development of a budget for a project, and then to adapt that budget as needed for project needs in a collaborative way.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that's pretty key. Great. I think we can wrap up this discussion unless anyone has anything they want to add.
I'll add. Oh, sorry, Mike. Yeah, I'll add one thing that a practice that we try to do, especially in this time of webinars and how easy things can be recorded and all that stuff. We try to not record anything, especially in these stakeholder engagement and end user meetings, just where it seems to help like open up more, I guess, honest dialogue. I guess not that people are trying to hide anything, but there's a lot more pressure once the lights are on and you know you're being recorded, because that can just live forever, you know. So try not to record anything and be as you know, anonymous as possible with our note taking and things like that. So just try to make sure that we produce an environment that's extremely conducive to people just having an open conversation.
That's
I'll
really
just add,
Go
I'm
ahead,
just going to add that a lot of funding programs now have planning grants or relationship building grants, including the program that you work for, Jeanne, the Restore Science program. And I commend that work. I think it's great. And so that's a way to invest monetarily in building the relationships that will lead to good projects, good science.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we hope, you know, as the Restore program, we hope that that continues and that it is not an anomaly in the future going forward. Absolutely. Well, great. I'll hand it off to Doug.
Great, thank you. And I'll add that the Science Collaborative has the equivalent kind of planning, which is the Catalyst grants, which has a similar perspective on investing in a future more constructed with stakeholder input proposal. So I'll take a quick moment to say to the audience, we're seeing questions coming in. Thank you so much. We will be getting to them. Keep them coming. They're being lined up for Jeanne and I to bring into the discussion after this last more formal component of the moderated discussion, which is that asking our panelists if they can describe how collaborative science or co-production of science has affected management and, you know, a personal experience, either in a specific experience or broader trends. And I think we'll start with Christine, because she mentioned something about boat traffic. And, you know, I'm an ocean guy, so I love boats. So I'd love to hear about boats, as well as she said something about sediment. So, I mean, two things that are dear to my heart. So Christine, can you tell us a little bit about boats and sediment work?
Sure. So my first science collaborative project that I was this early career PI on was really focused on an urgent management need in Northwest Florida or Northeast Florida, which is that we have a tremendous amount of particularly recreational traffic in our waterways. And most of those, basically the adjacent habitats, are unprotected with breakwalls or shoreline hardening. It's natural habitat. And so a key driver of wetland loss in our area has been just vessel traffic totally transforming the hydrology and sediment transport in our region. So our project was working on how do we build living shorelines that we can withstand vessel traffic and sustain our marshes, as well as the navigation function of the intercoastal waterway in Northeast Florida. So that was the kind of premise of our project. And the translation of this to management has been that we ended up involving some of our broader stakeholder community to come out and help us build the break walls that we built in our initial experimental project. We learned a lot. We had a lot of kind of hiccups and challenges and learned a lot about the kind of construction process. But I think it was that time in the field and then going back and looking at preliminary results that inspired some of the colleagues that joined us in the field to implement the same type of living shorelines approach at another location. And so the water management districts and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission had another location also eroding due to boat waves. And so there was this immediate translation of the experience that they had, what they saw in the field in terms of outcomes, into inspiring them to work on similar types of approaches at other locations. And so I think that was just one example of kind of an amplifying effect of our project and getting translated. Yeah, moving forward, we have other examples of what that's going to look like, but just for the sake of brevity, I'll leave it there. So thanks.
Well, we can certainly find time to have more of like what comes next if we get a chance. Mike, you've done something I think might be really relevant, interesting to both the NERRS community and the Restore community. It has to do with SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation, as well as work with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which play a really big role, of course, in the Gulf, but in also parts of the rest of the country. Can you talk a little bit about those experiences?
Sure. I just want to reiterate that I'm not the scientist doing this work. I just get to make decisions about what to fund. So Megan LaPierre with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Wetlands and Aquatic Research Center in Lafayette, Louisiana, did a really, really interesting project that no one had ever done. She just realized that across the Gulf of Mexico, nobody had ever mapped the submerged aquatic vegetation. I mean, where does it occur? How much of it's here and there? She did an excellent job. Megan always does really great work. That work was used as the foundation for some restoration efforts by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on the Chandeleur, excuse me, I mispronounced it, the Chandeleur Islands, which are east of the Mississippi Delta. They're 100 miles, maybe. I'm not that familiar with it, but they're the crescent-shaped group of islands east of the Mississippi. So that's a management application for that type of work. Another thing that we're quite proud of is in my travels around the region here, we have built a pretty strong relationship with the folks at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, especially the Tulsa office and the Austin field office. And those good folks at the Austin field office call us up regularly for our assistance on projects that involve species that are up for listing or changes in their listing status. And we do have some in-house science expertise. We don't just fund research. And our in-house scientists have been able to assist them in understanding the long-term implications of climate change for the species that they are interested in. So we built the relationship. It took a while, but now we're starting to get opportunities to assist them in things that, I mean, there's already one particular species, the American burying beetle, which there was a decision made a couple of years ago by the Trump administration on the change in status of that, and our science contributed directly to that.
That's wonderful to hear that connection being made, even if you aren't doing the science yourself, Mike. Apologize for that. Eric, can we come back to some of the marshy work that you've worked in, and can you talk a little bit about salt marsh projects that you've seen, the collaborative science approach changing a management direction?
Yeah, we'll get back in the mud for a little bit, I guess. But yeah, so this started way back when I was in grad school. We did a project where we looked at the cost effectiveness and functionality of different planting designs of like shoreline marsh plantings, fringing marsh plantings. And basically we did 0%, 50%, and 100%, like different checkerboard patterns. And 50% seemed to be by far the most cost effective. and by far, and as functional as the 100% when it came to filtering out nutrient pollution. So we've spent several years since then trying to, I guess, improve upon that, but every single time we design an experiment, whether we add in different planting densities or different arrangements or whatever, it always comes back to the 50% being pretty much the go-to. There's a lot of work on clump designs now too that we're trying to expand upon a little bit too. But in our area, there's whenever folks get they're interested in doing living shoreline projects or marsh plantings, a lot of times they get recommendations of 50% planting density, which is a little bit it's heavy. Most contractors don't plant at that dense a level, but that's kind of the recommendation or goal that agencies in the area are shooting for. And yeah, that was interesting to learn. Or I heard that actually when I was applying for a permit to do another project, the permitter told us like, hey, if you can do 50% planting density, and I was like, where'd that come from? And then traced it back to our work a while back. So that was an interesting story. And along the kind of the boat wake side of things too that Christine was talking about, we've done some work like trying to get a little bit more cost-effective measurements of wave energy and incorporated that into some of the projects that we've been working on, evaluating or assessing living shoreline projects in particular. And since then, there's been a whole lot more requests in our area to get specific wave energy measurements to help design coastal restoration projects. And in the past, it was just like, that's high, or that's low, or that's mid wave energy, but we didn't even know what that was. So now we're getting a little bit better idea of specific numbers that we can plan around, which makes the project a lot more successful going forward and cost effective too. So those are two examples that I've got on the top of my head at least.
Those are all great examples, and I think picking up on something that Mike had said earlier, he didn't get into this to talk to interact with people, and you both, all of you are talking about very specific hard science elements that you are examples, and yet it's the application interactions that really have converted that into a new direction or new approaches or changing status of species. So there's still the hard stuff behind it, the bugs. What did you say? The bugs and bunnies. But the people element is really coming through the approaches. So speaking of people, we have about 15 minutes left, and we have a number of great questions that have come in. So thank you, audience members, for contributing. So I think what I'm going to do is turn it over to Jeanne if you want to grab the top question there, and I'll be quiet for a moment and read through some of these great questions.
Sounds great. Yeah, so this first question I really like. It's about early career folks, and as an early career folk myself, this is something I think a lot about. So do you guys, any one of you, have tips for recent graduates interested in beginning a career heavily focused on collaborative science? And is there anything about collaborative science work that the panelists wish they had known about in the beginning of their careers? And I think that this is very relevant for people later in their careers who are just starting to get into collaborative science as it becomes more important in the community. Yeah, go ahead, Christine.
Sure, I'm happy to start with this. So I think that as an early career person, you are making decisions about where you invest time, what types of collaborators you invest time in building. And I think it's really valuable to think about your natural resource management stakeholder community as a part of your collaborative network, and that it's as valuable for you to build out your research network with other academic colleagues as it is to build out this dimension of your career if you really want to think about sort of diverse impact that you may have, not only in driving, say, fundamental science advances, but also in having some impact of your work outside of the academic sphere. And so I guess my advice is to take the time and make the effort to start building these relationships today. And one of the things that we've had as a key part of our discussion coming into today is that you don't have to start at the top of these organizations. You can start with another entry-level person that's working for one of the NERRS, or is working with the Restore program, or is working in the local state, community extension office. You don't need the top leadership, because you know what? Everybody has a role and a responsibility in this kind of collaborative space. And I think having a broad diversity of people at a range of different positions is really where you're going to get the richest type of expertise and skills and mechanisms of building formidable relationships with these different organizations. So I guess don't discriminate based on their career or their sort of status within an organization, and also dedicate a lot of time and effort into building this out in the same way you do in your research collaborations.
Thanks. And I guess I'll add off of that, like what would you say that or any of you can answer this, what would you say that looks like? What does that mean, like volunteering on the weekends or what have you? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
For me, as a program manager, it looks like new faculty coming into my office, shaking my hand and saying, here's what I do, tell me what you do. And yesterday, in preparation for this call, I spent a half an hour on the phone with one of our early career researchers here at the University of Oklahoma. He's impressed me with his ability to build relationships. And so I wanted to visit with him and get his perspective. And one of the things that he pointed out to me, which was one of the most important aspects of this, was he had great mentors. So if you're early career and you want to do co-production, you want to build those relationships with the stakeholders, see if you can find somebody in your department or in your college or at your university who's already doing that. And even if they're not in the same discipline as you are, you can learn stuff from them. And it's much easier. I very much commend y'all, both NERRS and the Restore Science program, for putting this seminar or webinar, together. This is great. This is not the way that you learn how to build relationships. It's from doing it and falling on your face, and from learning from mentors. That's the best way. So that'd be the advice that I would give an early career person.
Yeah, I'll follow up on that real quick. And my grad school advisor is on the call. I see he's got a question too, Juice Sabrian. But he really pushed me to get out there and do as many presentations as possible during grad school, and it really helped. I definitely did not appreciate it at the time, because I was like, I don't have time to be running around and talking to all these people all the time. I just want to do the science, But that certainly helped me out in my career. When I got my first job after, I guess my first real job, I was not the most qualified person for it. But I asked the hiring manager after the fact. I was like, why did y'all hire me when this other person who I knew had the exact skill set that you need to do this work? And they said, your presentation skills were a lot better and you could command a room. And the public facing kind of doing presentations was more important to them than knowing every intricacy of the science, which you can learn throughout the process. So that was real eye-opening to me. And also too, I'll say, try to be the face of whatever project you have going on. Be the person that emails and coordinates the meetings. Be the person that does all this, so your name is synonymous with whatever project is going on. And then I guess last but not least, do the grunt work, because what I've seen so far is that a lot of the people that I was down in the mud doing plantings with and all that stuff are the people that I'm working with now that are in elevated positions. We're all kind of elevated positions. So building those friendships from the beginning, even when you have no clue what any of y'all are going to do, is important.
Thanks. Doug, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, and I think what Eric was just saying is a perfect segue about presentations to this question. So the question is, scientists and managers usually speak different languages, such as have different interpretations of the same term or issue. It therefore seems that co-learning and cross-communication and understanding must come first and is just as important as co-production. How can we enhance co-learning between scientists and managers? Does anyone want to take a crack at that?
I would just say I think that this requires, I think a great way of facilitating this is acknowledging that it needs to happen when you get together in these group meetings, and that you voice that this is a room and a space where if you don't understand what I'm saying or the way that I'm saying it, I need that to be something that isn't glazed over, but that you articulate that you don't understand. Because only until you are willing to admit what you don't know or what isn't translating to you can you even raise awareness with the other person. So I think part of this is just setting some of the group expectations of the way that you're going to communicate with each other and try to build that shared I guess, what would you call it? Language, I guess, as a team. And making sure that you're advocating and voicing when you don't understand to make sure that translation happens. Yeah, Eric, I see you're waving.
Yeah, I'll just say, yeah, I second everything that Christina said there, and yeah, that to me that's extremely important. Not having a lot of content, but I just wanted to say yes on that.
What a great question, and what a great answer, Christine. To take a step back and think about setting the ground rules, facilitating the discussion, that's great. All I could add is I would just say communicate early and often. You know, the more y'all talk, and with the ground rules that Christine just laid down, you'll work it out. You'll figure it out eventually.
Yeah, and something that I run into a lot is, you know, researchers, you know, we operate in the theoretical world a lot of times, whereas that's not the case for people that's putting in projects. They're operating in the real world. So I think just making sure that those two worlds meet, and that's basically what Christine was saying with her answer. But yeah, make sure that you're living in the real world with your science.
I'll just say one more thing too, which is that co-writing things, and it can be everything from writing the proposal to writing educational documents that are trying to communicate the science to writing summaries and peer-reviewed papers together, is a great way of identifying when there's a mismatch in communication and whether we think there's management implications that the managers say that's incorrect, or that on the science translation side that they're kind of trying to communicate it on our science and the scientists say, whoa, that's not what our results say. You need to take a step back and interpret it in a different way than it's being communicated here. So I would just say another great opportunity for the co-learning is the putting pen to paper or building graphics collaboratively and having that be a co-production place, and just making sure that everybody on the team agrees that those products of your team reflect everybody's expertise and expectations and et cetera. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just sum up with kind of what I've heard there is that, you know, there's not as much of a science to that as much as there's an art to it. You know, it's learning to communicate, and communication does have science, but it's mostly artistic in a way, even if it's verbal. Thank you for your answers. Jeannie, you want to take another one? We have a little time for probably maybe two more.
Yeah, so this one I like. It kind of switches gears a little bit. So the question is, what about traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous traditional knowledge? Any experiences or lesson learned working with indigenous communities? Mike, go ahead. You're nodding your head.
Yeah, I'll be happy to speak to that. TEK is extremely valuable. It is largely applied. So I see TEK. Now, I have not worked in this realm. So what I'm speaking about is just things I've read about, okay? And I do have some experience with tribes that have participated in research projects. And it's a challenge. It is a real challenge to try to mesh Western science approaches to things with traditional ecological knowledge. Some of the best things that I have read are where the science is more on the theoretical side, and then the TEK is more on the applied side. So I would be happy to be corrected. My experience is very limited with this.
I don't have any experience to speak to on this topic, so I wish I did. I hope to in my career.
Yeah, me either. Same boat.
Yeah, I think this sounds like, from the conversations I've had, it sounds like it's something that is very important to a lot of researchers, but haven't necessarily figured out how to best overcome some of these barriers. But awesome. I'll hand it back to you, Doug.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think on that subject, we are looking to continue to grow that in our portfolio of projects as well. So, so anyone out there listening, science collaborative folks, something we're looking for growth in.
And I know the science program is as well.
Of course, I think all of us within NOAA are. So, so I think that just goes across the board, as well as I'm sure the USGS too, Mike. So this will be our last question before we wrap up today, and I'll leave with a thank you to all three of you. So just in a quick moment, I'm going to just kind of speed around this question because it's a very rich one. How can coastal resource managers better share resource management needs and questions with the scientific and academic researchers for potential collaborations? So how can the managers connect to those researchers? So I'm going to maybe toss that to Eric, and then Mike, and then Christine.
I'll keep mine short and sweet. Talk to your Sea Grant folks, because a lot of their job is to basically condense a lot of these needs and report them back and fuel a lot of their research competitions, which a lot of times acts as pilot projects for larger research opportunities later on. So that'd be it for me.
I would say that when you come up against a problem, a management problem that you're facing, think in terms of what additional information do I need, and how universities are. It needs to be additional information that can be gathered in the next 2 to 3 years. That's the cycle for grad students usually.
Yeah, I would say that, in the same way that we're trying to get researchers out of their silo and into your spaces to get to know you, you can just as easily come onto campus and come into, and we love getting, having management folks give talks and seminars and then host them on campus to meet with a variety of different faculty. And so I think that's one way of building relationships, and I wouldn't be shy about that. That's urgently desired and would be beneficial. And then I think the other way is to leverage key people and sort of, I'm a director of a center, Eric's in director position, is to leverage those people that are nodes of networks within a given institution and say, hey, these are my research needs. Who within your institution has the right skill set to maybe help me here? And I field those types of requests all the time. And so I think that's another sort of strategy for finding the right expertise. Yep.
Those are great answers. Thank you so much. Thank you for being succinct with those. Nick, you want to go to the last slide? We are coming up with 1 minute left to go. So thank you, everybody, to our panelists. Jeanne, thank you to the Restore program from the Collaborative for participating and excuse me, conceiving of this work. Sorry, Nick, is there anything, or Jeanne, is there anything that you'd like to add before we hand it back to Nick?
No, that's all. Thank you so much for working with us, and thank you to all of our attendees.